13. Jeremiah 29, verse 13. And ye shall seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading this morning.
I grew up in a very secular Jewish home. And I joke, the way we kept the holidays, it was like, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. Okay. That was the depth of my religious training. And I was also a direct corollary of that. I was raised very postmodern. You have your truth, Derek, and that's your truth. You have your truth, and that's yours. And it didn't matter if they were logically opposite each other, because there was no God's eye view. Truth was social, personal, cultural, and that was it, okay? And that's pretty much how I believed and grew up believing. And I still remember, though, I was 21 years old, and I was in a pizza parlor in Gainesville, Florida. And I was eating the pizza and drinking, a non-Adventist beverage. And I'm reading a philosopher. And he said something in that book just changed my life right then and there. It was something to the effect of, in order to live the most perfect life upon the earth, you needed to find out the reason why you were here and live accordingly, or something like that. And then all of a sudden, it just suddenly hit me. Hey, look, there was the pizza sitting on the table in front of me. Now, you could have had 1,000 different people with 1,000 different views on how the pizza got there. They might have thought aliens dropped it from a flying saucer. It evolved. The god Marduk created it. You could have had 10,000. They could have started religions. They could have died. They could have killed over their view on how the pizza got there. And maybe every single view was wrong. But it didn't change the fact that there was this pizza sitting on the table in front of me. And somewhere out in the universe, there was an explanation for this pizza, why it got there, the purpose, whatever, even if nobody ever knew what it was. And at that moment, it just hit me. I'm here. There's a universe. There's the cosmos. There is a reality here. And that just as something had to explain the pizza, whether I could know it or not, I knew there's the cosmos, there's a reality. There's all creation. Something, whether I could ever know it or not, had to explain it. And whatever that something was, that was the truth with a capital T. So suddenly, at 21 years old, in this pizza parlor in Gainesville, Florida, it hit me that truth had to exist. And it's funny, I found some old high school friends on college, from high school on Facebook, and they had heard rumors about me, and, oh, Cliff, we heard you found God in a pizza, or we heard you had a vision of Jesus in a pizza parlor. No, all that happened in the pizza parlor, I believe, was a moment of sheer pure, rational thought. There's something here, something had to explain it. And I walked out of that pizza parlor. I remember it was 1975, 76. I was 21 years old, and it's night, and I can still remember walking through there and the sudden realization that truth had to exist. Now, whether I could ever know it or not, that's a total separate issue. I couldn't be wrong about the fact something is here. Maybe it's all an illusion. Fine, then that's true, wherever the illusion came from. Maybe we're all brains in vats. Fine. Maybe, it's all Marxist atheism, whatever. But I realized something, there was a reality here, and something had to explain it. And I remember I felt this, don't ask me why, I felt it so strongly. I literally felt the pain in my chest, thinking if it were humanly possible. Because again, even though I knew truth had to exist, that was a total separate issue from whether I or anyone could ever know it. Okay, that was just, that one had really, in one sense, logically nothing necessarily to do with the other. But once I realized that it had to exist, I remember thinking, I felt it, literally, there was a pain. I thought, if it were humanly possible, because again, it might not have been, but I thought, if it were humanly possible to know what this truth was, I remember thinking, I wanted to know it. I didn't care where it led me, what it cost me, what I had to suffer. If, and that's a big if I could know it, I wanted to know it no matter what. And all I know is about 3 years later, I became a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, that was remarkable for a lot. First of all, growing up, I knew only one Seventh-day Adventist, and he was my dope dealer. I used to buy drugs from him, okay? And he used to witness to me get stoned, and he would witness to me about his religion. And I thought, well, this must be a cool religion. Maybe they were Rastafarians or something. Now, this happens to have a happy ending. Because he had come back to the church, and 25 years later, he and I had lunch at the GC cafeteria one time. But that was the only Adventist I knew growing up. Now, the other reason that was strange for me to become an Adventist was growing up, there were two kinds of people I really hated. I hated Christians. And I'm not kidding, I hated vegetarians. Okay? I was so carnivorous. I can still remember I was in the Soviet Union and sitting at a table with this girl, and she was a vegetarian, and I mocked her so much she almost started crying. And she goes, I really resent you doing this, okay? So, but anyway, also, even though my feeling about Christianity, though, it was a lot more deeper seated than that, though, because even though I wasn't raised religious, I was raised a Jew, and I knew all the persecution, all through history, mostly instigated by the church, the Catholics started it, and trust me, Luther and the Protestants weren't any better. All the persecution done in the name of Jesus by people, claiming that, they were going to give love, if they don't baptize, they said, accept our hand of fellowship in the Lord Jesus. If not, we're going to burn you with the stake, or we're going to drown you. And, the Holocaust happened in Christian lands by people who went to church growing up and so on and so forth. And I was bitter. And I used to vent my anger out. There was this, at the University of Florida at Gainesville, I was there in the 70s. There was this hellfire and brimstone preacher His name was Jed Smock. And Jed used to get out on the campus and he'd have his Bible in his hand and he'd be preaching hell, fire, and damnation. And there'd be a crowd of students around him and he'd be in the center of the circle, and he'd this. And I used to get in the center of the circle. I'd curse him, I'd curse his mother, I'd curse his God. I mean, he was a charismatic. He used to swear there was no hope for me. And he was a charismatic. And he used to put his hand on his head and cast demons and speak in tongues, to cast demons out of me. And I'd start writhing on the ground. It was a show. Eventually, my friends nicknamed me Heckle. And it was funny because about 10 years ago, I got an email from a friend of mine. He said, I couldn't remember your first name. I just remembered Heckle. And then something happened and he remembered my name and he got in touch with me. And I showed my wife the email because she's been hearing this story. But he remembered me as Heckle. Well, this went on for a couple of years till I graduated the University of Florida in the mid-1970s. And at this stage of my life, I had one goal and one goal alone. I was going to be a novelist or nothing. I had writers and editors and novelists in my family, and all I wanted to, and I had started a novel my senior year at college, and it's called The Garden of Animals. I started that novel, and it just consumed me. Nothing else mattered in my life other than writing this book. And I started at my senior year, and I just finished school because I wanted to get it out of the way. But all I wanted to do was work on my novel. Well, I graduate, and I go back home to Miami Beach. Okay, I grew up in Miami Beach. Just about a month ago, I went down for my 50th high school reunion. And I'm back in Miami Beach, and I'm working on my novel, and I decide I want to go over to Europe to work on the novel in Europe, because I had been to Europe before. Part of the novel took place there, and I had a little bit of money left over from school, so I'm going to go over to Europe, and I'm going to just find some kind of casual job I could, anything I could, and just work on my novel. So I fly to England, and I get over to England, and I'm hitchhiking around England trying to find work and this and that, and things aren't working out. I'm not getting settled, so I thought, I'm going to go to Sweden, because I had lived in Sweden a couple of years earlier on my own, just bumming around. I got illegal work over there and could speak the language. So I decided I'm going to go to Sweden. So I hitchhike to the British coast, and then I'm going to take a boat from England to Holland, and then I'm going to hitchhike to Sverige, Sweden, okay? And well, the whole time I'm hitchhiking in England, it's raining on me. Well, I get to Holland. It rains more in Holland than it rains in England. And I'm walking down the gangplank, and it's cold, and it's rainy. And I'm thinking, I'm going to Sweden. Well, right ahead of me is a guy with a backpack. And he's got a sign on the back that says Greece. And then I'm just thinking, Sweden. And I go up to him and said, hey, man, are you hitching to Greece? And I go, yeah. Oh, he goes, yeah. And I go, what a coincidence. So am I. Let's hitch together to Greece. And just like that, I changed my mind. So instead of heading one direction on the road to Sweden, I'm heading the other direction to Greece. Well, two guys with backpacks in the rain, we're not getting rides, so we just split up, okay? And I go on my own. And 4 long, hard, hot days later, I felt like I walked through communist Yugoslavia. I get to Athens, Greece. It's late in the day, and I had a friend who had lived there, and I had his address. So after 4 days, whatever, on the road, I come to this house in the city in Athens. I knock on the door. This little old lady comes out, and I ask for Faunus. I say, is Faunus here? And she says, Faunus no here, Faunus in Miami. So I think she could see my disappointment, so she feeds me a meal. And an hour later, I'm back out on the streets of Athens. I have no idea where I'm going to go, no idea what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to sleep that night, much less what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And finally, I find a plot of bushes along a wall, and I just take my sleeping bag out, and I go in my sleeping bag, and I go to sleep. And that night, I have a dream. Now, I was totally secular. Dreams meant nothing to me. You know, what did you eat for dinner before you went to sleep? Did your mother breastfeed you long enough as a baby? You know, I had no, it was nothing. But I had this dream, and I was dreaming that I was sleeping in the bushes. And then I dreamt that I woke up and booked a ticket to Israel, to fly to Israel, to live on a kibbutz in Israel and write my novel. Okay, that was my dream. And when I woke up, I thought about that, and I thought, wow, that's not a bad idea. And right across the street was a travel agency. And so just following the dream, I go over to the agency, I book a ticket, and whether that day or the next day, I'm in Israel, and 2-3 days later, I'm on a kibbutz in Israel working on my novel, just as I had dreamt. Now, maybe after these October 7 attacks, you know what a kibbutz is, but just think of a community. I hesitate to use the word commune because that's an awful, but it's just like a little self-sustaining community, and they would take volunteers in and so on to work there. So I'm on this kibbutz, and I love it. I worked 30 hours, mountainous, right on the edge of the Galilee. It's the edge of the Golan Heights, north of the Sea of Galilee, beautiful. And I worked 30 hours a week, and the rest of the time was mine to just work on my novel, because nothing else mattered other than my novel. Now, I'm going to give you 2 details why I'm there, about me there, that you might thought, what is this? But believe me, they come in later. You know, I'm a writer, and I was a writer then, and I read, and that time of my life, I practically lived to read poetry. I read a lot of poetry. In some ways, I say reading poetry helped me learn how to write. And there was one book of poetry by this woman named Sylvia Plath. Maybe some of you know she was been very popular years ago, and the stuff impacted me like nothing I had ever read. It was heavy stuff. One place she goes, she gives her kids cookies and milks, writes this poem, and then sticks her head in the kitchen oven and gasses herself, okay? This kind of intense stuff. But nothing I had read had impacted me like this poetry, this book of poetry by Sylvia Plath. So remember Sylvia Plath, and when I was on the kibbutz, I had a blonde Danish girlfriend. Her name was Tina. Okay, so remember blonde Danish girlfriend Tina, and remember Sylvia Plath. Well, anyway, I'm on the kibbutz, working on my novel, and then who should show up but a group of 12, 13, 14 fundamentalist Christians from America. They're these evangelical, whatever, that are really into Israel and prophecy. You know, the whole futurist thing, that Israel fulfills all the prophecies, and a 200 million man Chinese army is going to come down and attack Israel in the valley of Megiddo, but the church is going to be raptured, and 144,000 Jewish virgins from the 12 tribes of Israel are going to preach when the church is raptured. I mean, to us, it's a bunch of silliness, but they're very sincere Christians, and they came over there to be kind of like, try to be like silent witnesses to the Jews on the kibbutz. Well, I was furious. Okay, you know, here I am, I'm in the boonies of the only Jewish state since the Bar Kokhba rebellion in like AD 135, and now all these Christians are here. Well, I mean, I had a lot of experience haranguing Christians, and I just cut loose on them, and it got to the point where it really got out of hand, and the Jews on the kibbutz, these people were diligent, hard workers, whatever. They finally told me, if you don't stop badgering these people and leave them alone, we're going to throw you out of here, okay? So I just backed off, and I didn't care. I wanted to work on my novel. Actually, I got to know them. And in the end, I'll say this. No matter how thoroughly obnoxious I was to them, they never stopped loving me. And that had an impact. But anyway, a year, I'm on the kibbutz for about a year. So I put out over 2 years in my novel. And I'm getting antsy. And I decide I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go back to Europe. I want to work on the novel in Europe. I'm going to get out of here. So but again, everything's centered around my book. So I leave Israel, and I get over to Greece again, Athens again, and I hitchhike. I hitchhike up to Copenhagen. And part of my novel was going to take place there. Now, in the middle of Copenhagen, there had been this vast military barracks. And the army had abandoned it years earlier. This is the 1970s. And it was like this alternate community. All these hippies and these squatters and stuff had moved into the place and took over. And it was just like a big hippie community in the middle of the city. And I had been there before, but for some reason when I got there, it just really just seemed kind of skanky and dirty. And I think half the drug addicts in Europe were there, and every day somebody was dying of a drug overdose. And it really wasn't what I had remembered it as, and it was kind of sleazy. In fact, I'm there 2 days, and I'm walking through this courtyard, and I hear this woman screaming. And I look over, and there's some woman's on the ground, and this guy's kicking her and stomping her. And, I just walk by. I think, I don't want to get involved in this. I don't need this. But I guess my conscience bothers me. So I walk over, I come up, and as soon as I come up, he stops beating on her, and she gets up and runs away. And I thought, I did my good deed for the day, and I start to walk away. And this guy, some strung-out little heroin addict, I'm sure. I start to walk away, and the next thing I know, this guy just turns around, and he just sucker punches me right in the mouth. Just bam! Hits me here. Well, I'm not all that big and all that strong and all, it's taken me 68 years to get this little gut, man. I'm proud of it, But I'm not that big. But when I was in college, I used to box. I was a boxer. I boxed on a bag all the time. I got into a ring one time, and then I went back to the bag because the bag never hit me back, okay? Anyway, this guy punches me. Well, it's just reflex. I was a boxer. I didn't even think about it. I just turned around and boom, boom, boom. Flat out, I laid him out. Just 1, 2, 3, he was out. But what happened was, when he punched me, he knocked my glasses off. I mean, my eyesight's so bad, they wouldn't even do LASIK on me. okay? And my glasses are gone, and I can't find my glasses, and I don't want to be groping in the mud for my glasses while this guy gets up. So I just reach over and grab him by the head and go, find my glasses, find my glasses. So I get my glasses, and then I say to him, look, man, I'm not interested in your marriage problems, go get counseling or something, And then I take him and I throw him on the ground. Well, as luck would have it, I got a weak right knee and a weak back. And the moment I threw him on the ground, both of them gave out on me. I felt this pain in them both, but that wasn't the big problem. The guy gets up and he pulls out a knife and says, I'm going to kill you, man. Well, boxing or no boxing, you don't fight somebody with a knife, okay? You run, which did my knee and back wonders, but it was like out of Keystone Cops. I'm running down the street going, help, police, help. I mean, I was scared. The guy's threatening me with a knife. And amazingly enough, the cops come. And they take us down to the police station. And then the cop, he wasn't thrilled about me punching the guy out, but I was just defending myself. He hit me first, okay? But then basically he said, look, according to Danish law, we got to let the guy go because the knife isn't long enough to make an arrest, okay? It was long enough to put in my spine. But anyway, the bottom line, I'm back out on the streets. My knee hurts, my back hurts. I got a swollen lip, my mouth from when he punched me. And now I'm back at that place, and I'm looking over my shoulder, a little nervous about this guy. Now, the bottom line, the reason I'm telling this story is that things are not exactly going particularly well for me, okay? Now, on top of it, you're going to have a hard enough time believing what I'm going to tell you. I met this guy under such bizarre circumstances. I never tell the story because I know no one's going to believe me. But I had met a guy who lived in another part of the city, a nice part of it. I had met him earlier. And this guy was deep into the occult, deep into spiritualism, deep into all this stuff, which it all meant nothing to me, but his apartment was creepy. And this guy got really creepy at times. And he had all these cult books and all this. And he would get in these drunken stupors. And he would sit in a chair and not get up for days. He'd soil himself. And he'd stomp. And he'd shriek. And he'd moan. And he would just howl and make noises and on this. And he just creeped me out. And one time I'm looking at this guy. And I don't know squat. This guy's so messed up, he needs anything. And I said, hey, man, I said, have you ever thought about Jesus? Okay, I say it to him. And as soon as I say the name Jesus, I'll never forget, he stops the stomping. And he looks up at me, and I still remember one eye. Don't ask me what that was about, with one eye. And he says, 20 years ago I asked for Jesus. Instead, I got the devil, okay? That's what he says to me. Well, folks, back then, Jesus, the devil, Santa Claus, the good tooth fairy, Buddha, it's all the same to me. It means nothing to me. But when that guy said that, he so freaked me out. I said, I'm out of here. And I just left. And I can't take this anymore. And I left Copenhagen. And I traveled enough to know you can't get away from yourself by travel. But I said, I got to get out of here. And I end up going to Paris. And I'm in Paris, and I'm trying to get settled. And I had been on the road a lot alone, but my knee was hurting, my back was hurting. I was just free. I had personal issues. My life just started spiraling down. And I'll never forget, I even remember where I was, and with my wife one time we were in Paris, I said, I was standing here when this happened. I finally said, okay, God. It was like, if you exist, I need a sign. Otherwise, no, in fact, oh, no, I actually forgot something. I'm walking down, and I'm feeling desperate, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to kill. I thought about jumping off the Eiffel Tower. And as soon as I had that thought, this other thought, boom, comes behind me and knocks that thought out of my head. And the thought was, hang on, because maybe this Jesus stuff is true. But you know, as soon as I had that thought, I can still remember, I cursed myself. I said, your whole life you viewed religious people as weak. Oh, they couldn't handle the hard knocks of life, and so they pray to their Buddha statues, or they sing to Jesus, or whatever. You know, my whole life it was always like, bleh. I mean, it was a crutch. I had nothing but antipathy for people who believe that way. And then I thought, and now for your miserable 23 years, it's the first time in your life you feel like you can't handle it. And so you're going to reach out to some God or something to make you feel better. And I remember it's almost like I shook a fist up in the sky. And I said, no way. I mean, I'd rather jump off the Eiffel Tower, dead, squashed like a grape, than live a lie, no matter how good the lie made me feel. And I remember I stopped and I said, okay, God, if you're there, if you exist, I need a sign. You got to reveal yourself to me. And little did I know later, it wasn't until years later I read somewhere in the Bible, Greeks seek for wisdom, Jews seek for a sign. I mean, I knew nothing. But I said, if you're there, I need a sign. And I left Paris, and I went back to Israel. And I was going to go find another kibbutz and just work on my novel. I put over 2.5 years on my book now. Nothing else mattered. Everything was the book. It controlled my life more than I controlled the life of the characters in it. The life that kind of took a life on their own. I just needed to keep the nouns and verbs, you know, in conjunction and so on. And I go back to Israel, and I go back to my old kibbutz for a visit. And I told those Christians, I had gotten friendlier with the Christians. I told them what happened in Paris. I said, look, I'm open. If God's there, he's got to reveal himself to me. I need a sign. You know, and one of them said, all right, if you ask, you'll get it. All right, fine, whatever, you know. So anyway, I go to Tel Aviv. So you don't just, they wouldn't let me back on my old kibbutz. I went back to the kibbutz to get back, and they wouldn't let me back on. I think they were glad to be rid of me, the Israelis. So I was going to have to go to another kibbutz. So you don't just walk up to a kibbutz, you know, you go to a main office and they assign you. So I get to Tel Aviv, and I get to the main office in Tel Aviv to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I walk in the room, and there's a woman at a desk. And I sit down at a chair, and there's a boy next to me who's ahead of me. He's there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I just happen to look over on the desk of the woman in there, and there's a sheet of paper. And it has my name, Clifford Goldstein. And so I interrupted her with the guy and said, look, ma'am, how did you know I was coming? You know, I'm Clifford Goldstein. And the boy sitting next to me jumps up and says, no, that's my paper. My name is Clifford Goldstein. All right, I mean, Clifford Goldstein's not the most common name, but I am in Tel Aviv, okay? And I said, Cliff, where are you from? He says, Miami Beach. I grew up in Miami beach. And when I told my mother the story later, she remembered we must have had the same pediatrician, because when I was a kid, pediatrician bills would come to our house that weren't for me. So anyway, he was there, and he was there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And even though they told me they had no room, I knew they were lying. And I said, Cliff, you go to my old kibbutz and just tell them that your name is Clifford Goldstein and you come from Miami Beach, and watch what happens, okay? So he goes to the kibbutz, okay? So I get assigned to another kibbutz, but I ain't getting my act together. I'm just like a chicken running around with his head. I'm going to go home. You know, my life was just in turmoil then. So, but I go back to the old kibbutz for a visit to say goodbye. Well, I get to the kibbutz, and they had maybe 30 different rooms for the volunteers. Different little little cottages, okay? And Clifford Goldstein was in one of the cottages that I had been in. And there were 2 beds in the room. And he was sleeping in the same bed that I had been in when I was there. So, you know, he can't know how incredible that is. But we're sitting there, and I'm talking to him. And it's pretty weird. And he's sitting on one end of the bed, and I'm sitting on the other. And we're chatting. And then I look over the bed on the bookshelf over the bed. And I had left, you know, when I hitchhiked, when I went up to Denmark, I hitchhiked, I just left all my books up there. You know, you take a book or two when you're on the road, you meet people, you trade books and so on. So I left all my books, and I see a bunch of my old books on the bookshelf. And I said, hey, Cliff, you like my books? And he goes, what are you talking about? Those are all my books. And I go, no way. And I reach up for the volume of poetry by Sylvia Plath. Same author, same title, same edition. My friends who lived on the kibbutz, I would tell them the story. I said, remember I used to make you sit there and listen to me read her poetry to you, whether you wanted to or not. Same book. I looked at it, but I marked my book up. And well, who reads this stuff but writers? And I said, Cliff, are you a writer? And he says, well, you know, I really think I want to be a writer. Then we're talking. And this girl walks into the room. I never saw her before. It's Clifford Goldstein's girlfriend. She's blonde. She's from Denmark. And you'll never guess what her name is. Her name is Tina. Okay, everybody's looking at me. This is exactly, well, this hits me. And I go down to the Christian group. And I'll never forget, one of them says to me, he said, I'll never forget this. I've even, sometimes when I've written this up, I use this. He says, Cliff, you were asking. To this day, I always laugh about his enthusiasm. Because he goes, Cliff, you were asking God for signs. He goes, what more, man, do you want? The Lord's calling you by name. Well, when he said that to me, it's like I'm sitting there and I'm thinking this and I'm processing this. And I know, you know, I'm asked for a sign and this couldn't be a coincidence. And I still remember it's like the first time in my life, I kind of looked up in the sky with a little bit of reverence, you know, a little bit of fear, whatever, you know, just the first time. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, these Christians whom I had harangued and harassed the whole year, they took me down to the Jordan River and they baptized me. And they gave me a Bible. And I fly back to the United States and I go back to Gainesville, Florida. The only problem was I was no more born again than a corpse, okay? Meeting my double, that was heavy, and I just knew, man, there's got to be something more out there than didn't know what to make of it, okay? And I come back to Gainesville, and I barely eking out an existence because all I want to do is work on my novel. 2.5 years I put on the book. That's all, everything else is subsumed to that. So I'm back, I'm working on the novel. Now I want to backtrack just a little bit. When I went back to Israel, I laid down one afternoon to take a nap. And I'm laying there, and I felt this strange tingling in my toes. And it rolled up, and then it would come right into my head, and I had the sensation I'm getting shot down a wind tunnel. It was loud, and it was, I sat up, thought, that's horrible. I didn't like it. In fact, there's a kibbutz. If you ever take a tour to Israel, there's a kibbutz called Ein Gev, where they have, anybody ever done that? And they have a fish restaurant on the Sea of Galilee. If you ever done that, that was the first, I was on that kibbutz. That was the first time this happened to me. And then I come back to the States, and it keeps happening to me. And it, and it was and I didn't like it. It was very frightening. And then I'm back in Gainesville, and I remember saying to myself, the next time this happens, don't fight it, okay? So I'm laying there, and the pounding in my head, the pounding, and the next thing I know, I feel myself, zoosh. I fly right out of my body. I go right through the roof, and the next thing I know, I'm hovering in the air, in a great crackly mist, outside the second-story apartment of a couple of friends of mine who were trying to get me into a guru. Well, then the next thing I know, boom, I feel myself back in. Now, please, before I go any further, I am a hardcore Seventh-day Adventist today, okay? I am as dogmatic about the state of the dead and no separate immortal soul. I mean, I would burn at the stake for that, okay? I am as certain of that as almost any doctrine we have. I know that now, but back then, there wasn't anything anybody could have said to me that would have made me think that was anything other than my immortal soul leaving my body. And the thing is, however much, I'm convinced now it was all demonic hallucinations. If you ever read near-death experiences, it was the exact phenomenon of the near-death. I think it's all demonic, but at that time, I didn't know. And anyway, after that, I thought, wow, maybe the occult, maybe spiritualism, that's the truth I'm looking for. Because, yeah, it was heavy meat in my double. And, and the Christians gave me a Bible, but, I try to read the Bible, and I don't know. I never got past the talking snake story, okay? So it was like nothing clicked. But I thought, maybe this occult and spiritualism. So I said, I'm going to study this. So on my way over, I'm walking over to the library at the University of Florida. As I said, I'm a starving writer. I need a job. And there's a health food store. And I thought, oh, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Okay, vegetarians. I need a job. So I go over to this health food store, and they were closed, and I knock on the door, and this guy comes out. He's a Hungarian. And I start telling him what I'm into. And he goes, what? And he pulls me in the health food store and locks the door. And he sits me down and he starts warning me that this occult stuff is demonic and, you're being deceived. Well, he might as well told me Santa wouldn't come down the chimney for me, then talk to me about that. But he says, here, read this book. And he gives me a book. So he hands me a book. And I go over to a library at the University of Florida. and I find some occult book, some of you remember, some of you are look old enough to remember a lot of, the card catalog. You know what a card, these kids don't know. And I get the card catalog, and I find some occult book. And I sit there, and I got the occult book, and I read the first chapter, and I practice the first technique. They tell you to sit there and stare at a point in the back of your head. Okay? So when I'm done staring at a point in the back of my head, I'm going to go put the book back on the shelf. But here's the thing, folks. I'm walking through the library, and literally in one hand, I've got this occult book. First time in my life, a book on the occult that I'm getting into. And literally in my other hand, for the first time in my life, I got the book the guy gave me in the health food store. Cult book in one hand. What do you think this was? The Great Controversy in the other. I was clueless. I truly was clueless. I had no idea. It was all honing in on me, but I was oblivious. Well, I started reading The Great Controversy. I liked it. I didn't get that far in it. She was a lot more enamored of Martin Luther than I am, but that's another story. But anyway, about 2 nights later, the sun is setting in Gainesville, Florida. It's 1979. It's a couple of weeks before my 24th birthday. I'm going back to my room to work on my novel. I had put 2.5 years of my life in it so far. And when you're 23, 2.5 years. In fact, it was going better than it had ever gone. I was more positive about this book. I didn't care if I needed 2.5 more years. I was going to still do it. It didn't matter to me. It was nothing else mattered than the book. It was my life. If you asked me at that time, did I believe in God? Did I believe in Jesus? I said, well, I was baptized, but I mean, I knew there was something else out there, and I wasn't hostile to Jesus anymore, but it meant nothing to me. Okay, and but between meeting my double, and believe me, that was a quote spiritual experience. Okay, between the two, I knew there was more to reality out there than what I got taught in high school chemistry. Okay, but that was where I was. All I wanted to do was work on my novel. So I'm walking back to my room, Gainesville. Sunset. I walk in, I have a manual typewriter, okay? You talk to people, they think everything's in the cloud. It was a manual, wasn't even electric yet. I walk back to my room, and it was so funny. I've been telling this story since it happened, and there's this one detail only recently. An Adventist scholar wrote a book, John Peckham, and he talked about the terms of engagement in the Great Controversy. And anyway, I come back to my room, I sit down, and I don't know why, but for some reason, I just close my eyes. I don't know, and I uttered a prayer. I don't know who I was praying to. I just closed my eyes, and the reason I hadn't thought about it for 35 years, because it was so quick. It was just such a quick thing, and only his book made it come back. I closed my eyes and uttered a prayer. And that was all the Lord needed. I turn around to put my finger on the keys, and at that moment, the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ came to me. I mean, in an instant, I knew exactly who he was. It was never a question. I knew exactly who he was. And his exact words to me were, Cliff, you have been playing with me long enough. If you want me tonight, burn your novel. Okay? Simple as that. In that instant, he showed me that, it was all crystal clear to me. It was just as clear. You shall have no other gods before me, even though I never even knew that text. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. And I said, God, please, I'll rewrite it all to your glory. If you want me, burn the novel. God, please, I'll put it away and we'll deal with it another time. If you want me, burn the novel. Please, God, let me just finish it. I remember there were 3 back and forths. Let me just finish it and I'll give my life to you. If you want me, burn the novel. I couldn't do it. I could have slit my throat. I had nothing else. My friends were getting degrees and this and that, and I had poured everything into this book, and now burn it? That would have been easier. And I remember I jumped up, I burst into tears, and I ran out of the room. And I'm walking through the streets of Gainesville. And these are the exact streets. When I walked out of the pizza parlor saying I wanted to know truth no matter what. Well, whoa. Now I was confronted. I couldn't do it. And I'm walking through the streets and all this. And then finally, oh man, I'm wearing myself out on this. It's almost done. At one point, I stopped. Why I always remember this detail. It was dark, street lamp. There was a street light above, and there were these bugs flying around the light. And I stopped underneath the street lamp. And finally, I said, okay, God, I want you. I want truth more than I want this book. But if you want it burned, you're going to have to burn it for me. But I surrendered. And at the moment I surrendered, God might not force, but I did sort of feel this grip around my neck. But the moment I said that, everything lifted off me. Everything. And I had perfect peace. I knew what was going to happen. At that point, people, if you told me I was a sinner, I would have looked at you like, what are you talking about? It meant nothing. I had not the slightest concept of I knew no theology whatsoever. And the idea of me being this, it meant nothing to me. All I knew was I bet God, and this is what I had to do. And I go home to my room, and I got this 2-burner hot plate that my mother had given me in hopes I'd cook food. But it doesn't have. My wife leaves me food. Everything is set. But I said, I got to heat it up. And she says, yeah, forget it. I'll eat it cold. Okay, I'm just not. Anyway, but that's 2-burner hot plate. And I picked up, again, I knew nothing. I picked up the manuscript. 2.5 years of my life. I knew nothing. And I laid that manuscript on the burner, turned the knob, and burned my novel. And that was the night I was born again. And those occult, I'm convinced. See, the devil's religious. Satan's religious. He saw I was getting interested in spiritual things. I think it was the impact of that guy in Copenhagen. That was heavy stuff in there. And he got in, and as I said, if you ever read about near-death experiences, they float out of their body in this mist and talk about meeting their dead relatives. That was the exact experience I had. But I wasn't anywhere near dead. And see, the devil saw I was getting interested. And see, I don't want to keep talking about him, but this is it. It's like growing up a secular Jew, the idea for me of the devil. But after that experience, folks, whether theology, whatever, poetry, I know. But when I gave my heart to Christ that night, those occult experiences never came back. They never came back. And that preacher I used to harass, he comes back to town. So I get out I get out there right next to him, and he probably figures, here we go again, And I end up witnessing with him to the crowd, many of them who remembered me as Heckle. Now, these were Adventists in the health food store, and I start studying with them, and then, now when okay, all right. If I got you this far, you believe everything so far, I'm standing in front of the health food store, maybe a month. And I'm getting ready to, I've been back, maybe a month after I burned the book, so I've been home 6, 8 weeks, I can't remember. I'm getting ready to cross the street in Gainesville, Florida, and I see a car drive by. And my thought is, do I run? I'll wait. And I wait, and a car drives by. And who is sitting there driving right past me? Clifford Goldstein. Okay? Last I saw him in Israel. And I mean, I know the Lord did that for him. And he pulled over and he said, I got to admit, Cliff, this is incredible. Now, I know that I found him. I found him on Facebook. He's a real estate developer out in California, but he's scared. He won't take my friend requests. So many ways I've tried to contact him, but he blocks me out because meeting him on the street like that wasn't just for me. Now, it is so funny, too. There's another Clifford Goldstein. He's much younger. He's a gynecologist in Long Island. And every now and then, his patients email me with this, Dr. Goldstein, my IUD is hurting, what do I do, And I've got to email these women back and explain. It's really sticky. I hate doing it, but anyway, that's what happened. And so anyway, I started studying with them in the health food store. And it took me about 8 months from the time I burned that novel and met the Adventist. It was about 8 months until I eventually joined the church. I remember the first time they took me to an Adventist church, and they're kneeling and they're praying and all that. I remember thinking to myself, I will never be a Seventh-day Adventist. And as I said, that guy, he came back to the Lord. And here's the thing. Let me wrap up with this. When I burned my novel that night, I mean, you can't know. I've been telling this story for the first 3 years, telling the story. I couldn't talk about the novel without pain. And then one day it hit me. Wow. Doesn't hurt anymore. Doesn't hurt. And just the other day I told someone, I was in a Barnes & Noble, and I looked at the shelf with the literature. And I'm thinking, even if I made it, even if it became famous, whatever, and have the book there, it means nothing. It means I could have lost, you know what I'm saying? I mean, at the time when you're writing, and I look at those books, because I'm looking at things at the whole other end of my life. Okay, I was 21, in my early 20s. Now I'm in my late 60s. But when I burned, from the 20s, you don't know. I burned that novel, I realized I might not ever write again. I died to it. That's what it took. I died to it. I had no idea what I was going to do. I'm useless for anything else. I mean, it's like a joke. The other day I got this little razor thing. And I'm with the instructions. I can't get it open. I can't get open. My wife comes over, doesn't even look at the instructions. Boom, fix it, okay? She's been doing this for 38 years now. We go through this. Even with I just can't do it. But anyway, I burned the novel. I was done. I didn't know what I was going to do. And for about 2.5 years, I didn't do any writing. My life was totally turned upside down. And then one day, the door opened for me to write an article. And I wrote the article. You know what it was on? Obviously you won't, though. It was on the health benefits of vegetarianism. And the point is, I wrote that article, and I never stopped writing since. And I think that's the message. I died to it. I died, and that was it. And the Lord brought it back to me, and so on. But anyway, I like to pray, right? If you might have someone else pray, however your service, but I always like to pray after I tell this story. And I just want to say, if there's, you could be a lifelong Adventist, you could be an elder, a deacon, whatever, you could be anything. See, there was nothing evil about that book in and of itself. I've written 27 books since then, okay? Most of them are out of print, most of them flop, but whatever, I'm still writing, that's all I care about. I've given up worrying about people reading it. But it doesn't, no matter, it was my relationship to it. And you could have something in and of itself, and I'm just going to pray that if there is, look, in the end, and the two things in that room that night with my encounter with God. First was the reality of free will. I mean, I have read book after book after book battling over free will. I've gone back and forth over that till my neurons turn to lucite, okay? People argue over that. That night, I knew I had free choice. And see, here's the other thing too, people, and I forgot to mention this, and this is the part that totally freaks me out. After I had that occult experience, the one where I really went out, or I thought I went out, I started writing about it. I started weaving it in my novel. So had I not burned that book that night, what I do with Athens, I would have done with the occult, and I never would have gotten out. So it's like I had free will, but the other thing too, that night when the Lord came to me in the room, I sensed, if I don't do this now, I will never have another opportunity. And looking back now, I mean, the devil had me. I was reading about the occult. I was having occult experiences. And this is the part that freaks me out. I just started writing about it. But that night, it was, the main point here was free will. And so God is not going to force you. Free will was so sacred, rather than deny it, even before time began, Jesus knew what was going to happen. He was going to go to the cross. He was going to go to the cross because he refused to create beings that didn't have free will, because without free will, we couldn't love. We couldn't love. So he had to give, and he knew what it was going to do. So you've got free will. It's the most costly. I remember one time years later, I wrote an article, one of my columns, and I just freaked out about my eternal destiny depended on what I did with my free choice. And I don't always use my free choice the right way. And anyway, so I just want to close. I don't know most of you, and I certainly don't know any of your hearts, but if there's something, well, let's just pray. I want to pray. Father, again, I thank you for you reached down to one sinful, broken being, and you touched me in a very powerful way. And yet, Lord, I know that your love for me, your concern for me, your knowledge of me, your desire for my salvation is no more for me than it is for any person here right now. And Heavenly Father, I pray if there's anyone here, young, old, whatever, that they're clinging to something that they know is wrong, that it doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles and everything I had, but even with maybe your still small voice, you will bring conviction. Bring conviction the way you brought it to me over 45, 40 some years ago in that room. And that they will just know what the issues are. And Lord, I just pray that you'll make it clear. And that if anybody here, they will use this gift of free will to choose to give up, to die, to burn their book, whatever it is, and surrender to you. Nothing this world offers, nothing lasts, nothing this world offers is ever as good as we think it is. In most cases, it leads to bitterness and pain. And yet you offer us the promise of eternal life in Jesus because of his death. And I pray that if there's anyone here holding on to anything to keep them from that you will bring that conviction to them and that they will make the free choice for you. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah.
The closing hymn is 214. We have this hope, if you'll please stand. Faith.